Hello, everyone, and live from Vienna, Austria, it's Saturday morning. Welcome back to our award-winning show, everybody. We do have an exciting program for you today. We will be talking with the renowned liturgiologist and professor of theology and liturgical studies at Notre Dame University in Indiana, Maxwell Johnson. He is also an ordained minister of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. He is the author or editor of 25 books and over 90 articles and essays. His research interests and major contributions are in the area of early Christian liturgy, with a focus on Christian initiation rites, meaning baptism, confirmation, and the First Communion rites, not necessarily in that order. And, of course, the Eucharistic liturgy, the anaphoral prayer and its origins and important sources. I can show you some of the books that I happen to have in my library here that are either edited or authored by Professor Johnson. These are classics, everybody. Anybody who studies liturgiology today, whether in East or West, because you see the earliest sources of Christian liturgy are relevant to all of the traditions across the board. So I'll show you this book, The Rites of Christian Initiation. You can look that up and get it on Amazon. Then there is this very important edition of a source known as, it's actually many different sources that were compiled, thrown together, the Apostolic Tradition, edited together with somebody I hope to have on the show as well, Professor Paul Bradshaw and Ed Phillips. So these are books that we should know about. This book in the prestigious series Orientalia Christiana Analecta was the doctoral dissertation of Maxwell Johnson, another important liturgical source, the prayers of Serapion of Tmuis. Anyway, before I tell you more about Professor Johnson, I would like to tell those of you who subscribed this week to our audio podcasts, the link to which is here. As promised, your names have been engraved, or carved, I should say, into our world-famous prayer pumpkin. So, who are our lucky inductees into the prayer pumpkin this week? Well, we have, I have to find the name. I know the name, I'm just looking for where it is on the pumpkin. You see, I make the names very big. Michelle Shelton subscribed to the audio podcast. By the way, I'll tell you about them briefly. But anyway, Michelle, congratulations. You're on the pumpkin. And we have Denise Canelos. Denise, you see, I'm making the names very big because I discovered it's easier to carve them into the pumpkin when they're big. Denise, we're running out of room on the prayer pumpkin. It is the month of November. There are still many pumpkins available that we can get. So we will have to get a second prayer pumpkin and carve new names into the other pumpkin. All right. Anyway, congratulations to Michelle and Denise. Thank you for subscribing. Everybody, if you want to know what all the excitement is about concerning our audio podcasts, well, we do have a weekday audio podcast, a relatively brief audio podcast, every morning on weekdays. And every morning you can start your day with listening to, as I talk about the saints of the day, both new calendar and older calendar, and a brief reflection on a scripture passage. So start your day that way. Join our many subscribers at this point, the zillions of happy and well-informed subscribers to the audio podcast right here. Get your name carved in a pumpkin, because who wouldn't want that to happen in their lives, right? I know. So that's what all the excitement is about. Anyway, let's get on with telling you more about the renowned Maxwell Johnson. I have to mention that besides the rites of Christian initiation and the anaphoral prayer as his areas of expertise, Professor Johnson has contributed a lot also to the study of the feasts and seasons of the liturgical year. One can find also on YouTube some of his public lectures, say on the martyrs. I have to mention that Professor Johnson has been, in the past decades, a teacher of teachers of liturgy, both in Western and Eastern traditions. I will specify that there are Orthodox professors of liturgy and various Eastern Christian professors of liturgy, Armenian, Melkite, and Greek Catholic, that have studied under Professor Johnson. Two friends of mine specifically I will mention, but there are others as well. Professor Vitaly Permyakov, who now teaches at Jordanville Theological Seminary of the Rocor in upstate New York. He also is teaching at St. Vladimir's Theological Seminary in Yonkers, New York. And I'll also mention another friend of mine, Professor Stefanos Alexopoulos, a Greek Orthodox priest who teaches at Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., and he wrote his doctoral dissertation under the direction of Professor Maxwell Johnson. I could mention the Armenian liturgical scholar, Bishop Daniel Findikian of the Armenian Apostolic Church, and the list could go on. I don't know if everybody is aware of the type of sharing that goes on between different Christian traditions when it comes to theological and historical scholarship of the various branches of the church's tradition. There are those who have become experts and are very good at what they do, from whom also our leading Orthodox minds have learned. And I think that's a very healthy aspect of the church's life, that those in the church readily learn from those who are the best in their fields, also when they don't happen to be in communion with us. This is a long-standing tradition to learn also from those not within our church. The great fathers, you might know, like Basil and Gregory, his best friend, and other great fathers, were educated, also the great Chrysostom, also by pagans, not even Christians, like the great Libanius taught the great Chrysostom, and that was a pagan. The great Cappadocians, like Basil and his best friend Gregory, studied at a pagan academy at Athens. And this is not a problem. It is something that they were actually proud of, and that they would mention their fine education wherever the best education was to be had. These Christian minds were educated from the best of their time. So, having said that, let me mention also about Professor Johnson that he is married for 44 years already to this lovely woman named Nancy, and he has two children, Bryn Elizabeth and Zachary Benedict. So here I'll provide a picture of the family. He also plays guitar in a blues band called the Oblates of Blues. So not everybody will know that about Professor Johnson, but his students, by whom he is well loved, everybody, by the way, will know that. Now let's get to his biography. He was born in a small town called Benson, Minnesota, on November 15th, 1952. His birthday is coming up. He began developing an interest in religious and theological ideas quite young, in high school. But as he puts it, he put together a rock and roll band at this point, quote, to keep from becoming too weird. The rock band was called Tecumseh, named after a famous chief of the Shawnee tribe. Professor Johnson, Max, received his bachelor's degree from Augustana College in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I don't know if I'm pronouncing Sioux Falls correctly. Regardless of that, he received his MDiv from Wartburg Theological Seminary in Dubuque, Iowa. Then he went on to receive two master's degrees, one in liturgical studies at St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota, and another in theology at the University of Notre Dame in Indiana, where he later was to become the renowned professor, as I've mentioned, of theology and liturgical studies. Now, in 1992, he received his PhD also at the University of Notre Dame in liturgical history, minoring in liturgical theology and patristics. Now, he wrote his doctoral dissertation. I already showed it to you. It was published in this series about the prayers of Serapion of Tmois, this 4th century source, under the direction of Professor Paul Bradshaw. His many honors, everybody bear with me, because a CV like Professor Johnson's is not easy to get through, and I am leaving out a lot of significant details. His many honors and appointments include having been president, first vice president, then president of the North American Academy of Liturgy in 2014. In May 2017, he received an honorary doctorate from Wartburg Theological Seminary in Dubuque, Iowa, and Professor Johnson was inducted as honorary canon of the Cathedral of St. James at the Episcopal Diocese of Northern Indiana in South Bend, Indiana. Now, on with our show into our exciting interview with Professor Maxwell Johnson. Hello, Max. How delightful to have you on our show.
Sister Vassa, it's great to be here. And I even got out my Coffee with Sister Vassa mug for this occasion, because I wanted to fit in as much as I possibly could.
You fit right in, my friend. I mean, you've got the beard and everything. So
there you go. I should have worn a cassock, but I thought clerics was probably enough.
No, we've had people in the collar also, Orthodox sometimes scandalously also show up in the collar. So
there you go.
It's allowed on this show.
Very good. Great seeing you.
Yes.
And I notice over your right shoulder, I see Father Taft.
Oh, I was hoping you would notice.
Yep.
Yeah, it was the anniversary of his death just a couple of days ago, as you know.
Yes.
Oh, yes. He's at my right shoulder, and my main boss is on the left shoulder.
On the left, right. And higher, elevated. Yes. Very good.
It's an iconostasis I have to maintain.
Yep. Very good.
We'll get right to our first question.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So, tell us, why did you start studying liturgy of all things?
Well, that's a very good question. Part of me says, why would one not want to study liturgy, since it's the very source and summit, as the Second Vatican Council says, of Christian life, and consequently, baptism, which gives us our foundation, is liturgical. The word, its proper context, is in the liturgy itself. If you want to study Scripture, why not study how it's used in the life of the Church? The Eucharist, of course, is the great icon of the kingdom, and in the liturgy, we're formed in order to live lives of diaconia as well as martyria. Consequently, why wouldn't one want to study liturgy? I often don't understand why people want to study other things with regard to theology. But my own coming to liturgy, I guess one might say, starts quite young. And the little Augustana Lutheran Synod church in which I was baptized and spent the first few years of my life, and then when it became part of the Lutheran Church in America, Pastor Olson always sung the liturgy. So I grew up hearing every Sunday a sung liturgy in basically what you could call English Gregorian chant. So even as a junior high and high school kid, Sunday after Sunday, I would hear the opening litany, which is very similar, by the way, to the opening litany in the Liturgy of John Chrysostom, but it went something like this in one of our settings. In peace let us pray to the Lord. Lord, have mercy. So every Sunday, singing these somewhat complicated Gregorian melodies. And I think you could almost say a sort of lex orandi was being formed within me from an early age. And
Tell the folks at home what the lex orandi
oh,
is.
sorry. The lex orandi, of course, is a principle in liturgical theology, saying that the way we pray shapes how we believe. Okay, how we believe in terms of both the faith of the church and even our encounter with God and anything we might want to relate to that. So the principal phrase, we sometimes shorthand it to lex orandi, lex credendi. So the law of prayer is the law of believing. Um, but it's a longer thing. It's a particular kind of prayer of supplication for grace that shows us who we are in relationship to God. So anyway, this is being formed in me, much like one could say Augustine talks about being formed by the Ambrosian chant in his Confessions outside of Ambrose's cathedral in Milan. So music had a crucial role. But we ought to add here, a lot of my high school friends also were not Lutheran, but Roman Catholic. And I used to go to mass with them all the time. And one of the things that in those days, remember, talking late 60s in this time period, okay? So ancient history for many people. But I would go with some of my friends to mass at various Catholic churches in the area. It was a big Irish German area where I grew up, and then big Scandinavian area also. So we had the Swedish Lutherans, and the Norwegian Lutherans, and the Irish Catholics, and the German Catholics. So I would hear frequently the 1967 wonderful translation, not like the current one, of the Roman canon, which began in this wonderful way. We come to you, Father, with praise and thanksgiving through your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. And then it listed all of the apostles, the bishops of Rome in the first part, and then at the end, all the martyrs, especially the women martyrs. I was simply blown away. And I often say that that's why I study liturgy, is because of hearing over and over the orality of that prayer in my youth. So it was formed at an early age. So a pastor who always sung the liturgy in my home parish. Over at the Norwegian church, they weren't doing that. The pastor would say, "In peace, let us pray to the Lord." And then the congregation would sing, "Lord have mercy." And I'm going, well, this doesn't make sense at all to me. It still doesn't make sense to me to do it that way. Of course, the fact that my pastor was an incredibly good baritone had some influence on that, I'm sure. And then as an acolyte as well, certainly grew to love the church's liturgy as well. But it wasn't until I got to seminary, Lutheran seminary, and we were in an ecumenical consortium with a bunch of Dominicans at Aquinas Institute of Theology when they were in Dubuque. Now they're in St. Louis. But I had a course my first year of seminary from Father Frank Quinn, a Dominican, and Frank was doing his doctoral work at the University of Notre Dame in liturgy. I didn't even know you could do such a thing. And so I got really excited, and eventually that's what I did. After a stint at St. John's Collegeville, where I did a master's degree, studying under Gabriela Winkler and Elred Teagles, right? So Gabriela, a course in Christian initiation, right at the time, her major book on the Armenian baptismal ordo was coming out from Orientalia Christiana Analecta. And I had the privilege of basically hearing that whole book in a class.
Right. Wow.
So,
wow.
And of course, coming to Notre Dame, and I got to have people like Taft and Paul Bradshaw, who became my doctoral director.
Yes. Oh, well, it's quite a story. So, I guess it was countercultural in the late 60s for you as a young man to be into the whole religion thing.
Probably so. I was just thinking about that recently, that still in the late 60s and in high school, pretty much everybody still went to church, in small town Minnesota, right out there at Lake Wobegon area, right? That that later, I mean, the 60s that were going on elsewhere hadn't really happened yet in small town Minnesota,
Oh,
right?
I see. Okay. So your beard is not to be attributed to you being this boomer who was, sometimes riding a Harley in
Right.
uh, nowadays, right? Uh, but
My Go ahead.
I'm presuming it's Orthodox influence.
No, yeah, must be. I don't know about that because my daughter, who is, what is she now? 34, 35, has never seen me without a beard. And
Okay.
I used to shave it off at least once a year when I was in college and in seminary. But I've said, no, it's just going. People tell me, including parishioners where I help out, just let it go. Just let it go. And I said, but it wouldn't get nice and long, but
Mhm.
it would get too bushy.
You make a good Santa Claus though at Christmas.
Yes, yes. I'm
There's
often confused. I'll never forget, this little kid came up to me once and said, "Hi, Santa." It was outside of the Christmas season, and I said, "Oh, hi, how are you?" Because I wasn't gonna,
uh,
burst his bubble on. He was so kind and polite. Right?
so you've told us so eloquently about the practice of liturgy and how
Hmm.
you find it natural to be drawn in, into the life of Christ through
Hmm.
liturgy.
Hmm.
I'm just paraphrasing here,
That's okay. Hmm.
putting words in your mouth. Um, but as for the academic study of sources of all this complex, ritual,
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
wanted to ask you as my second question, how, you know, how can the academic research, as you've been engaged in so very productively and prolifically, of the sources, of
Hmm.
Christian liturgy, um, of various traditions, actually, how can it inspire, in practical terms, the prayer life of a church going Christian? I mean,
Oh.
I
Hmm.
sometimes would think, this is not
Sure.
going to be very long, but I want to share that when I was initially, beginning to study liturgy in, really the nuts and bolts of,
Hmm.
getting the footnotes right and the kind of tedious stuff that
Right.
seems to be more not so much faith inspiring as faith killing perhaps sometimes,
Oh,
and some of the pettiness that can go on with the dating and this kind of
sure.
thing, it can get very far removed from what's actually inspiring you in church, what's actually nurturing your prayer. So this is
Hmm.
where my question is coming from, where as a liturgical scholar, and I've gone a way of popularizing it in a way that I was frustrated that it's not trickling down,
Yeah. Yeah.
trickling down to the people who are actually engaged in it, the
Right.
just the church people in my
Right.
church. So
Right.
anyway, that's my question. How
Yeah.
would you tell lay people, how the academic research inspires the prayer life of a church-going Christian?
Okay. Okay. Oh, that's really, I think, a helpful and a central question. And my answer to that would be, in part at least, that as we study these sources, we can't forget that we are in fact studying what you just said, how people prayed. If we're looking at it historically, if we're looking at, I tend to live in the first few centuries, so if we're looking at that, we're actually looking at how people prayed. And it seems to me that in itself is part of a spiritual discipline, to be engaged with the church throughout the ages in various ways. I think, for example, one of the things I'm really interested in is anaptoral development, the development of the Eucharistic prayer. in the history of the liturgy. And I have to say, you're absolutely right. We have to do scholarship correctly to get the right document and to get the right way in which all of these go together. And in that sense, that's no different than any academic exercise. But the fact of the matter is that the content or context in which we're working is the church praying these texts. And that can be incredibly inspiring as well to us in our prayer life. So for example, at least in Western Christianity, and this would include my own Lutheran tradition as well, the study of these ancient documents, that's how I look at things, the ancient documents, have a direct bearing on how we pray today. Let me give you an example. In, again, going back to growing up, the 1958 Lutheran Service Book and Hymnal, there was a Eucharistic prayer in there. First time in an American Lutheran document that we had recovered the Eucharistic prayer. And beautiful text. Now, here's how it goes. Tell me if this sounds familiar to you. You are indeed holy, almighty, and most merciful God. You are most holy, and great is the majesty of your glory. You so loved the world that you gave your only Son, that whoever believes in him may not perish, but have everlasting life. Having come into the world, he fulfilled for us your holy will and accomplished our salvation. Does that sound familiar?
I think that's the Post Sanctus of Chrysostom.
Absolutely it is.
Yeah.
Absolutely it is. And then
I was like, oh, I know this one.
I know it. See, it's great. It's great. And it's deliberate. It's 12 apostles and Chrysostom, because that's who these people that created this prayer were reading. They were looking at these sources. And then this one you'll know too. After the narrative of institution said, in memory of his death and resurrection, his ascension into heaven, and his promise to come again, we give thanks to you, Lord God Almighty, not as we ought, but as we are able. It's right out of Apostolic Constitutions, Book 8.
Yes.
Okay, so again, the study of these sources influenced even contemporary Lutheran Eucharistic praying, and this prayer is now the first option in our 2006 evangelical Lutheran worship. I use it just about every Sunday. Now, nobody out there knows that this is Chrysostom and 12 apostles and apostolic constitutions. Oh, and Basil pops up in there also, where we say that we who receive the Lord's body and blood may, receiving forgiveness of sins, may be sanctified in soul and body and have our portion with all your saints. Straight out of Byzantine Basil, you know. And
yeah.
So my point is, the study of all this has a direct bearing on our prayer life.
Well, right. When the scholarship actually gets considered by those who compose the prayer books.
Yes, of course.
So I guess my question was more about the individual scholar. You know.
Okay. Sorry.
I'm saying being burdened, so to say, with the knowledge of the good and evil of the historical development.
Okay.
When you eat from that tree, you can also be sort of frustrated within something called church.
Yes.
And the way that reform either happens or doesn't. Or happens a little bit too much. So all of that stuff is something that I'm wondering, because to a certain degree, as Taft would tell me, one of the wisest things that he said to me was, at some point you just have to come to terms with whatever pluses and minuses are of the church, the status quo also for different demographics in the church, be it the women or the Black people or whatever the church is doing today to people. All right. So that's what I'm saying. How does one simply accept the way, because liturgy is about doing whatever we're all doing.
Yeah.
We're not freelancing about today because I read a book. I'm going to, change things up. At least that's annoying.
Yeah.
If a pastor or priest does that.
Right. Right.
this is what I'm saying. How does one, not get distracted as a liturgist, uh,
Hmm.
and just do the way everyone's
Yeah.
doing it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a challenge. That is a real challenge. I hear you on that one. Um, to be honest with you, I have a hard time going to church unless I'm presiding, which I am just about every Sunday. But
That
isn't
is real
that
that's the best thing I have heard a liturgist say. I also have problems going
yeah,
because I'm not presiding.
that's right. That's right. I hate to say it, but that's honest. That's confession at that point. I remember a teacher of mine, Franciscan sister at St. John's when I did my master's degree, Sister Helen Rolfson. She basically said, if you want to be happy in church, do not study liturgy. And she was, of course, teaching liturgy at the time. And I've always thought that makes good sense. So
That
and
makes
I sometimes say to students, I've just ruined your church experience, haven't I? Because
sense.
now you know this, and it was much easier when you didn't. But it is true. And yet, I think Tap's absolutely right. You just have to at some point say, all right, none of this is going to be perfect this side of heaven, right?
Right.
And he didn't say that. I'm putting words in his mouth, but none of this is liturgy is not going to be perfect, but we carry on. We
Right.
do
I
the liturgy,
often
and
think,
we throw our scholarship in service to the church. But neither you nor I have the authority to make the kinds of decisions. We can only, I think it was Taft again who said the historian of liturgy can only say, okay, this is it, if the responsible authorities want to reform.
yes, his phrase was, I am a liturgical informer and not a
Yes,
reformer, right?
that's good. Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right.
Not a reformer, but an informer. Well,
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes we might neglect, and I'm not a
Yeah.
professor like you, so I'm just saying that I do find, even in the way that I teach, that it's important to sprinkle in
Hmm.
all those principles of actually the reality and of the way we accept and the way
Yeah.
reform happens as church and not
Yeah.
as an individual thing, and how
Sure.
the beauty of the tradition and the way it developed and the fact that it did change is
Yeah.
actually not discouraging. I mean, I say it tongue in cheek that, oh, it's just,
Mhm.
ruining our experience of liturgy to know too much about it. But I don't really see it that way now, in my middle age. I think that the beauty of it is that there are also the imperfections in it, you know,
Yeah.
and that this is, the beautiful sort of humility of Christ creating something that is handed over. Like, you give them to eat, you
Sure.
fallible
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I think that even with some of the, we could say, mistakes, but that's
Uh,
not the proper term,
yeah.
the things
Yeah.
that crept in that are not supposed to be, well,
Yeah.
in Byzantine liturgy, in the Orthodox Church,
Yeah.
we don't delve into some of the things that, perhaps should be a little bit, changed.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, we can do that in a classroom. We can say that. But even Taft's, I was going to say great book on the great entrance, but his big book, it is a great book too, but on the great entrance, he says, this is what could be done if somebody wanted to do this, and it would be consistent with the tradition. And in that sense, it's kind of an indirect um, advocation for some change. But he's not going to say this is what you have to do. That's not my job either. Yeah.
right. But I feel like he's done his job in that
Yep.
the man, now, may God grant him the kingdom of heaven. Uh,
Yeah.
it's there. There's
Sure.
reliable, of course, not only him, but the great, school, and you have
Yeah.
also, offspring in the
Absolutely.
liturgical
Mhm.
scholarly world. The thing is,
Right.
that, without the reliable information, unfortunately, there are a lot of less informed
Yeah.
would be perhaps reformers. of
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
so,
Yes.
there is somewhere to look if if and or when the
Mhm.
hierarchy is interested in looking into
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Think that the reason also, and I'm so grateful that you came on to this little show, and why I invited you is to uh, to demonstrate to people. It's, I think, a well kept secret that today a lot of the few actually professional Orthodox liturgiologists have been educated by people, not professors and great minds like yours, not necessarily, in communion with the Orthodox Church.
Right. Right.
That's a beautiful uh, testimony to the fact that even today, regardless of what some aspects of Orthodoxy seem to be
Yeah.
professing, there
Yeah.
is quietly a lot of sharing going on, and
Yeah.
especially learning from,
Yeah.
the study, from other
Right.
Christian
Well,
models.
the study of liturgy is itself ecumenical, an ecumenical enterprise, an ecumenical discipline. I mean, it's amazing. I think Father Stephanos Alexopoulos, there I said his name correctly. I always get it wrong when I'm introducing him. I put the accent wrong. But who's now at Catholic U? Well, he one of my students, and he was telling me one day, you realize in the United States that you have probably trained the most Eastern the numbers of Eastern people in the field of liturgy. And I was thinking, well, there's Stephanos, there's Vitaly Permyakov at Holy Trinity. Is that the name of the monastery?
Yeah,
Monastery seminary, Holy
George,
Trinity.
that's a Rocor
It
monastery.
is a Rocor, yeah. And then Mark Roosien, who wrote on earthquakes in Constantinople and their liturgical expression. That's a wonderful piece of work.
I
He's
haven't.
you enjoy that. He's currently doing a postdoc at Yale, and then we'll see where he goes from there. But there's a name. I mean, he's a brilliant guy, fluent in Russian,
Right.
and he's got a great future. I'm just trying to think of some others. Well, I just met this past week with one of the Coptic Orthodox bishops out of California, Kyrillos, Abdelsayed, and I knew him as John Paul Abdelsayed because he did doctoral work here and
Right.
focused on Cyril of Alexandria.
Oh,
And now he's been inviting me, or was here, and he invited me to come out and do a summer course with their School of Theology that they're working on. This is exciting.
well, of course it is. And, I guess just to explain also to our viewers, it has to be an ecumenical enterprise because of the fact that the earliest sources happen to be common. They're
Yes.
common to all of these different liturgical families. Uh,
Yes. And I'm very excited that we, in the last couple of years, hired both Gabriel Radel and Nina, I'm going to say her name wrong,
Libetich.
Gilbetich. That's right. I always put the accent on the first syllable, but it's not.
It's
And
not,
so,
well, maybe it is. I say that with confidence, but I don't know how it's pronounced
no,
either.
I think that's right. I think that's right. Anyway, we're going to go with that.
Right.
But they're both here. So what that means is Notre Dame has set itself up right now to be a great center for Eastern liturgies.
Right.
Down the road. I mean, both of them are experts in various aspects of Byzantine liturgy, and we have currently, even in our master's program, we have one Maronite, one Coptic Orthodox priest, with a few others now. This is great, and of course we.
About people are probably going to be, this is going to be lost on them,
Oh,
the names, but I just want to mention, isn't Nicholas Roussos was
oh,
your
Nick, of course, yeah, Nick's here, yeah, and he's another one I directed, right,
right,
and
right,
he,
very lovely person, and
yeah, and he's the bass player in the Oblates of Blues, of course.
oh, is he? I
Yeah,
didn't know that. Oh
yeah, yeah.
goodness,
Yeah,
you're
that's
really
what I get accused of. Whether or not on the application form we should say what instrument do you play, so
uh,
that I can sneak people into my blues band. But
Right, right. No, that
yeah,
I have
yeah.
mentioned that to our viewers in the introduction. Well, I'm
Yeah.
content to have already recorded it, but
Oh, great,
so
great.
I'm going to ask you another
Yeah,
question now.
please.
Our third question
Hmm.
about your experiences with well, I'm not going to say all Eastern Christians. Let's
Okay.
say the Orthodox ones amongst them of the Byzantine Rite. I want
Sure,
to
sure.
ask, you've probably also taken part, well, in the sense of been present at, I don't want to say something
Yeah,
really risky,
yeah.
in Byzantine liturgy.
Oh, yeah, of
And
course.
I want to
Right.
ask, could you note perhaps two or three differences and or similarities
Hmm.
as in as far as the Akzentsetzungen or preoccupations go
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
the liturgical piety
Yeah,
of Orthodox Christians as compared to your own tribe,
sure,
the
sure.
Lutherans.
Yeah, traditionally at least, and I'm not sure how much of this holds true anymore for Lutherans, but traditionally, of course, in spite of the Lutheran insistence on participation, Lutheran congregations until recently have been rather passive at worship, and part of that was. Um, After the Reformation, not at the time of the Reformation, but after, the emphasis seemed to be on the passive reception of hearing as almost the dominant sense, okay, in Lutheran, in Protestant worship in general. So hearing the word of God proclaimed. I mean, but along with that, of course, was the strong tradition of hymnody, and as I said, even a sung liturgy, even if for centuries that was what we might call the half mass. Okay, so the liturgy of the word, and then concluding at the time of the prayers of the faithful and the offering. But it was a very passive thing and an emphasis on listening, as opposed to a more Byzantine approach, where I believe all the senses tended to be engaged. So, not just hearing, which of course is a big part of it too, but also smell, touch, sight with the icons and so on. And, Protestant churches became pretty dull and boring with regard to art and environment in this country, not in Europe. Because they didn't go in and wreck them, but in this country, um, Lutheran churches are only now, I think, becoming again attuned to issues of sight and other kinds of participation. So, for example, the Good Friday right now with the veneration of the cross. I wouldn't have grown up with this. Ashes on Ash Wednesday. I didn't grow up with that. But these are all things part of the liturgical movement that have shifted and shaped Lutheran worship, and even finding icons and other images in Lutheran worship spaces. So there are shifts. There
Right.
are shifts that have happened. But the Orthodox, it's always been my experience at least, is a lot of sound, okay, and a lot of sound covering some things I wish weren't covered, like prayer said in secret that probably weren't historically. Um,
I just want to clarify for
please,
some
please.
people who might not
Sorry.
know that those prayers exist. Like
Yeah,
the
yeah,
main,
because they haven't heard them.
right, the main Eucharistic prayer
Yeah,
for the folks who haven't perhaps,
yeah.
well, they can watch. We do have videos on Divine Liturgy.
Well,
That
your excellent
plug.
your excellent series, right, on the Divine Liturgy, it's fabulous. People should watch that.
Oh,
Yeah,
thanks a
absolutely.
lot, Max. All right. Uh, well done. I paid Max to say that part,
Yeah,
everybody.
yeah,
Not
yeah.
not that much, not that much, but
Checks in the mail. It'll be just like what Rentel owes me.
the
Yeah.
checks, the checks. You're going to be disappointed, my friend. But but anyway, so there's the main Eucharistic
Yeah,
prayer called the
yeah,
anaphora
yeah,
is usually said quietly by the priest, not in
yep,
all Orthodox churches, while
yep.
the choir, beautifully usually, not all,
Yes.
is covering
Yep,
that prayer. That's what you're
that's right. That's right. That's right. Yes.
you
That's what I'm referring to. Those are things.
right. Do you find that there is actually, well, a thirst to hear the word, or would your experience be? But I
Mm.
suppose because your experience with Orthodox is with the academic types, so it's hard for you
Yeah,
probably
it
to
often is.
gauge
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
see the thing that one might notice in at
Hmm.
large in some of our Orthodox churches is that
Hmm.
it's not even that the tradition covers up a lot of the
Right.
word,
Right.
but that also the thing that might be frustrating for the
Yeah.
academicians is that people don't really miss it, or
Yeah.
they may not
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
what they're missing.
Yeah. Right. I think that's true. I think as a historian of liturgy, going to Byzantine worship is just a treat because you see, yep, yep, there it is. There's this. Oh, look, go to Vestry, say, there's the cathedral office, but it's sandwiched into this whole monastic structure. But most people aren't going to get that, or you go to Orthros and go, there are the laud psalms of 148 to 150 at the end. So there's the cathedral resurrection vigil, but here's this, that, and the other thing. People aren't going to get that. They're just going to church.
Right.
And this is what they've done. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
sometimes I think, the Last Supper or the Mystical Supper, as we
yeah,
call it, just to be different.
yeah, of course. Yeah,
Of course. It wasn't perfect either
no,
because Judas didn't perfectly
pres-
participate,
precisely.
right? So I think there was never perfect liturgy,
No,
uh,
no,
so
no.
that's okay.
Yeah.
Um, what I want to ask you,
Huh.
Matt, is I'm throwing this in, although it's not in our pre-planned questions.
Oh, it's okay.
I want to ask you a little bit about martyrdom because
Ah,
it's just so exciting the way you both write and speak. By the way, people at home, you could find YouTube videos with Professor Maxwell Johnson if you search in YouTube, talking about martyrdom as the seed of the church, as Tertullian said, and talking about and it's something actually that was referenced by Father John Bear a
oh
few weeks
yes, I
ago.
saw that. Yes. Hmm.
Yes. So, talk about a little bit to us about, how martyrdom plays such a large role even unto this day and
Yeah,
why
yeah,
it's
yeah,
Eucharistic.
yeah, yeah. Okay, very good. Ever since Ignatius of Antioch, martyrdom and Eucharist have gone together, if not even earlier. But certainly in Ignatius of Antioch, who interprets his own forthcoming martyrdom, end of the first, beginning of the second century. The dates for Ignatius are always up in the air, but roughly around 98 to 109, I think, are his dates during the Emperor Trajan. And Ignatius talks about becoming the purebred, ground now by the wild beasts. Okay, and hence he thinks of his death. He says, "I want the purebred of Christ and his blood, which is divine agape." Right? Talks about it. So Eucharistic, but Ignatius is one. Polycarp, the great martyr of Smyrna, Saint Polycarp, um, who right before he's to be burned at the stake, he offers this prayer, which is so much like the prayer in the document, no, the so-called apostolic tradition, where instead of offering the bread and cup, he offers himself. Right? It's the kind of prayer a bishop would offer at the Eucharist. Beautiful text. So Eucharistic. Oh! Look at that.
This edition of what is known as the apostolic tradition. Anyway, enough.
Anyway, yeah, yeah. So martyrdom was so key in understanding Eucharist and in understanding early Christian life. As I think it's Robin Darling Young who talks about, this is a public ritual, a public liturgy. Okay, and what's interesting, one of my arguments has been, we'll stick with the historical, and then I want to move to more recent, but one of my arguments has been, I think this is why the narrative of institution, take, eat, this is my body, this is my blood, comes into Eucharistic liturgy, into the Eucharistic prayer, because at the when martyrdom ceases, people need a reminder of what this meal is all about. sharing this meal might no longer get you killed. So what's the Eucharist? And the same thing happens in baptism. We start thinking of baptism along the lines of Romans 6, being buried with Christ in baptism. So I think there's a parallel there. I don't know if I'm right in that, but I think it's worth thinking about. But let's look today. It was Godfrey Diekman and others, Father Godfrey Diekman at St. John's Abbey, and others who have said today, not the early church, is the age of martyrdom.
Right.
And just a couple of examples when we think of, and this is something I've spoken on thanks to Bishop Vendikian, the Armenian genocide, which finally in the United States now we're recognizing as genocide.
Right. Right.
And the Armenian martyrs who were canonized just a couple of years ago, right? So they are now saints, victors in the Armenian liturgical calendar. The only Protestant group that I know of that actually includes that are the Episcopalians in the United States.
They went from being victims to being victors.
Victors, yep, victims to victors, which is, of course, what we mean theologically. And then when you think of, I don't know if you can see it behind me. Let me just grab it. These Coptic martyrs from Libya, right? Who were killed, all martyred together, and became immediately canonized by the Coptic Orthodox Church. Right. So that people like Pope Francis have said, what we're talking about today is an ecumenism of blood. And that people don't ask, I love this, people don't ask, are you Catholic? Are you Protestant? Are you Orthodox? They don't care. Are you Christian? Right. And that's enough. And
that was enough in Roman times.
Yes, it was.
Christianus sum. That was it. Yep. Roman.
That's it.
Right?
That's right. Absolutely. And we're back there. We're back there today. Yeah.
That's why I sometimes regret that the terminology has changed, because in the Orthodox world, it's important. The word Orthodox is more often heard than Christian. And I have against Orthodox, but the terminology has changed because, the Byzantines did not only call themselves Catholic, they also called themselves Romans.
Right.
We were the Roman Catholics as far as the Byzantines go.
There you go. Yeah,
but
very interesting.
So far as the name Christian, that the blood with which that's been baptized in, that identity, today, if one identifies and says just I'm a Christian, that's like a Protestant thing,
It is, isn't it? Yeah, it really is. It's like, what's interesting, for Lutheran identity, I can't remember who it was. It might have been Karl Broughton, theologian Karl Broughton, who said, okay, Lutherans are evangelical without being Protestant. They are Catholic without being Roman Catholic. And they are Orthodox without being Eastern Orthodox. I find that kind of helpful.
Well, okay, you just tell yourselves that. Like that? Do you like this? That kind of a comeback from me? I just wanted to. I know. I want to pull your chain.
I know.
So
it's pretty easy to do, actually. No, it's probably not. Yeah.
No. I know that you're a good sport.
Yeah.
No, we've had some quite petty discussions, of course, in the Orthodox Church about who's allowed to be called church, leading up to the Holy and Great Council and Creed. I had my little say about that. But, when we are, when we're exposed to this great witness of that was publicly shown on YouTube, these men, the Coptic Christians with the name of Christ on their lips being beheaded. I mean, how can any Christian heart not completely be humbled, and grateful for that witness? I mean, the ancient church considered the baptism of blood to be legit, and not to be doubted. Like you have said this about the sort of the the qualifications for canonization, martyrdom being the first one.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it comes in
Absolutely.
various forms, right? It comes in various forms, but I
Sure.
love the way you tie it into and show according to the sources and the early
Hmm.
apostolic fathers like Polycarp, like Ignatius before him.
Right.
Um, you know, the Eucharistic part of martyrdom and how that might inform our own approach to the Eucharist. Because,
Yes.
the interesting thing is in our whole perception of
Hmm.
sainthood in the
Yeah.
past many centuries, actually, we don't see in the Orthodox Church, for example, the recognition, not the actual sainthood, but
Hmm.
we don't see the recognition in the form of canonization, for example,
Right.
of
Yeah.
married of the marital union
Yeah.
being sanctifying
Yeah.
insofar as we just don't have canonized saints unless
Right. Well, we don't either. Lutherans don't either. So, yeah.
well became saints only because they were married. The last ones we had were
Yeah.
Joachim and Anna, but they only have a foot in the door as far as the era of
Right.
the church,
Right.
and Zacharias and Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
sure, we have married couples who were martyred in the
Yeah.
sense, in the
Yeah.
tradition, in the
Yeah.
usual
Yeah.
sense, or
Right.
they in the Middle Ages, we have a whole bunch of saints that accepted monastic tonsure
Yeah.
at
Of
the end of
course.
their lives, dissolved in
Right.
effect the
Right.
actual marriage,
Right.
and hence they were canonized. But
Yeah.
and back and in earlier times, there are early examples of what's called the celibate marriage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But again, it's not really the usual
Yeah.
marriage.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. And that's an issue, and that's an ecumenical issue too. I mean, yeah, I hear Roman Catholics talking about the need for models of holiness celebrating married life and love.
Right.
And there are some, like the parents of Saint Therese of Lisieux, who were recently canonized. But of course, you have to ask the question now. Now it's very interesting there. Of course, all their kids became Carmelites, and their home was like a religious community, also. But
Well,
still, it's a
not
married
no,
couple.
no,
Yeah,
I think you're right though, because there is the monastic child, I
yeah,
think, that is inspiring the canonization of the parents. It's like
yeah,
the parents of Basil and Gregory,
yeah.
and of Gregory the theologian as well. Uh,
Right.
but we don't even have hymnography to the
Hmm.
parents.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, we don't even have hymnography to Irenaeus of Lyon. So wrap your
Oh.
head around that.
Oh. Okay.
We
Okay.
don't. Uh, so there are these mysteries about
Yeah. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
tradition.
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, I love the thing I'm getting at is that
Mhm.
wouldn't it be if one recognized that the act of participating in Eucharist is
Yeah.
a mutual self offering and sacrifice?
Yeah.
Wouldn't then the lay people, like the
Yes.
married people and
Yes.
others that are not monastics, that participate in that, if we retrieved or recovered, I want to
Yeah.
say, the martyrdom of Eucharist,
Ooh. Ooh.
wouldn't then, because apparently it's just various forms of witness martyrdom that are recognized as sort of canonizable.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
be,
Oh, I see. I
you
see.
see what I'm saying? But
I
the church
do.
seems to only have, it's only on the radar sort of the official canonization process in monasticism,
Yeah.
in the confessors who didn't finally
Right.
die but were tortured,
That's right.
and in the martyrs, but
Yeah.
not in the, because see, the crowning of marriage in the
Right.
Byzantine rite
Yeah.
is
Yeah. Yeah.
supposed to be martyrdom. But if it doesn't
Yeah.
lead to that, why aren't they canonizable in
Yeah.
effect? Nobody's
Yeah.
saying that explicitly,
No,
but
but
it,
it's the way it works out. We associate holiness, or at least the tradition. Maybe we do a little better in this with Lutherans. I don't know. Maybe we do, but as I said, we don't really canonize. But our calendar of commemorations has a bunch of married people on it, along with your typical group. but I think that's part of the issue in the wider church is who functions as a model of holiness. And I've often said that one of the issues is who looks good in an icon or a statue in a niche, right? Well, it's going to be somebody in robes, right, with a halo. I mean, we haven't gotten to the point yet. California, the Cathedral of
That's a good point.
Los Angeles.
Aesthetic. No, that's a great point, because I totally agree that the aesthetic, when people ask, like, what are, I don't want to get into, I
okay.
get myself in trouble, but there's also the question of female priesthood that's, I think, also very aesthetic, because it looks weird.
Yeah.
We don't have the clothing.
Except, look at this icon.
Yes, of the Mother of our Lord. Well,
right.
She's not, that's still, a priest doesn't cover his head with a veil.
No, I know that, but the Theotokos gets away with it. Yeah. But I've always found this an interesting icon, with Christ coming out of the chalice and the Theotokos in the Orans position. So I like to show that in class, especially to MDiv students. But
the thing is, in our Marian feast, in the Byzantine tradition, after entering the temple, going there, not even every priest could go. And only once a year and so forth. That's definitely her just walking right into the priesthood.
But anyway, I'm saying as a model for but you're right about
the aesthetic of, because liturgy is a lot about habit. Pardon.
I got it.
No, whatever. It didn't really work. I wanted to hide it somehow. But so we when something not habitual happens in liturgy, even though it's different in like certain reformed liturgies where more creativity, but definitely in the Orthodox tradition, which most people think never changed, as Catholics say, they think it fell down from heaven like a ready baked pizza on Pentecost.
That's right. I always say didn't fall out of heaven in a tin box, right?
In a tin box, okay.
Similar, I
always use tap slide, but the thing is that it really is. Also because our symbolic language, it's important to stick to it. That's why, skipping between rites is sort of damaging, I think, because the symbolic language is not actually embraced.
Right,
so
right.
To change the symbolic language, because also the celebrants are symbolic,
right,
is a risky business, right?
Yeah.
So, but all of these things, it's so lovely to hear you speak, Max, and you're just a great teacher. And I don't know if I've said to my viewers in the introduction how really well loved you are, how you really, you're always fun and inspiring, as just very personable. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you for all of the work you've done for a lot of also in our Orthodox communion. To teach us in all of your books. So anyway, I hope we cross paths sometime again, because
I do too.
In a while.
It's been a while. Was Moscow the last time? Oh no, maybe Rome.
NAAL, I've seen you. I mean,
of course,
I go to North American Academy of Liturgy, conferences, but what the last time I saw you or heard you was a common worship editorial board like conference call.
Okay, yes, that's right.
But so right now we'll say goodbye, and then I want to mention something to you after we stop the recording.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much. And I'm saying goodbye to our viewers. Could you say goodbye to our viewers and maybe just any parting words?
Yes. Keep watching Sister Vassa. Watch her videos on the Divine Liturgy. Buy my books.
Buy Max's books like these. Look, these are. But you know what? I have actually plugged your books, but this one, well, they're all classics, of course.
Oh, thank you.
I'm sorry, I don't have all of them.
Oh, that's okay. My best one, my most fun one, I think,
Okay.
is this one, Praying and Believing in Early Christianity, in
Oh,
which I
that's
challenge some of the notions of what Aidan Kavanaugh and some others have called primary theology. I've
right.
said it's not necessarily primary, it's part of a whole network of theological sources. So anyway, it's a fun book. And it
Thanks.
only goes up through
I'm going to put up,
Chalcedon.
when I edit this, I will put up the exact bibliographical reference
Oh, thank you.
to
Thank
this
you.
book. So thanks a lot. I'm saying
Well,
goodbye.
thank you.
Goodbye to our viewers. Thank you to Max again. Bye, everybody.